They say a mother's love knows no bounds. But what happens when that love is weaponized against you? When my twin children, Cressida and Thorne, stood in my living room with matching smiles, holding power of attorney documents and telling me they were taking control of my finances for my own good, I never imagined I was staring into the eyes of betrayal itself. What they didn't know was that I had already discovered their secret meetings with that estate lawyer, and the recording device hidden in my favorite orchid pot had captured every venomous word. This is the story of how I turned their greed into their greatest lesson, and why sometimes the most profound love requires the coldest revenge. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Thessaly Vance, and until 6 months ago, I believed I had raised exceptional children. At 58, I lived alone in Wildrose Manor, a sprawling Victorian estate in Ravenscroft Harbor that had been in my family for 4 generations. My late husband Dimitri had left us when the twins were barely 7, his maritime shipping business providing more than enough for their Ivy League educations and my comfortable retirement. Cressida had become a corporate attorney in Manhattan, while Thorne managed a hedge fund in Boston. They visited rarely, called occasionally, but I attributed their distance to busy careers and the natural evolution of adult children finding their own paths. That October morning began like any other, with me tending to my greenhouse orchids and preparing for the annual Ravenscroft Harbor Botanical Society gala. I had recently sold my stake in Dimitri's company for $12 million, a decision that would secure not just my future but provide substantial inheritances for both children. The money sat safely distributed across several accounts at Bridgewater Financial, or so I thought, until that peculiar phone call from Mrs. Pembroke at the bank. "Thessaly, dear," she whispered, her voice carrying that conspiratorial tone reserved. For small-town gossip, I shouldn't be calling, but given our friendship through the garden club, I felt you should know. There's been unusual activity on your accounts. Large transfers, multiple signatures. My hand stilled on the orchid I was repotting, soil scattering across my workbench. "What kind of activity, Edith?" "The kind that requires power of attorney documents. The ones filed last week by your children." The greenhouse suddenly felt suffocating, the humid air thick with more than just moisture. I hadn't signed any power of attorney documents. My hands were steady as I set down my gardening shears, but my mind raced through possibilities, each more troubling than the last. "Thank you, Edith. I'll look into it immediately." But I didn't call the bank. Instead, I did something that would have been unthinkable just moments before. I retrieved the tiny recording device I used for dictating plant care notes and tucked it carefully into the soil of my prized dendrobium orchid, the one that sat on the mahogany console table in the front parlor where I always served tea to guests. Call it intuition, call it the sixth sense that develops after decades of reading people's subtle shifts in tone and gesture, but something told me I needed to document whatever was coming next. 3 days later, Cressida's midnight blue Tesla pulled into the circular driveway, followed by Thorne's silver Porsche. They never visited together anymore. Hadn't since their 25th birthday dinner ended in a screaming match over their father's legacy and who deserved what. Watching them emerge from their cars in coordinated movements, like dancers who had rehearsed their routine, sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the October wind rattling the copper gutters. "Mother," Cressida called out, her voice carrying that artificial sweetness she reserved for judges and juries. She looked immaculate in her charcoal designer suit, her dark hair pulled back in a severe chignon that emphasized the sharp angles of her face. "We need to talk about your future." Thorne followed, adjusting his Hermes tie with practiced nonchalance. His sandy hair was artfully disheveled, the calculated casualness of someone who spent hundreds to look effortlessly wealthy. "About your security," he added, flashing the boyish smile that had gotten him out of countless childhood transgressions. I welcomed them inside, noting how their eyes swept the foyer with an appraiser's calculating gaze, lingering on the Tiffany lamps and the Monet sketch that hung above the fireplace. We settled in the parlor, where I served Earl Grey in my grandmother's Wedgwood china, the delicate cups clinking against saucers in a rhythm that suddenly felt ominous rather than comforting. "You're probably wondering why we're both here," Cressida began, setting down her tea untouched. A red flag if ever there was one, as she had inherited my love for properly brewed Earl Grey and never refused a cup. "We've been concerned about you living alone in this massive house," Thorne continued, his fingers drumming against his knee in a nervous tell he'd had since childhood. "After what happened to the Weatherbys last month." The Weatherbys, our elderly neighbors who had been swindled out of their savings by a charming contractor who promised to renovate their guest cottage. I had helped them file police reports, connected them with a reputable lawyer, even housed them for a week while their accounts were frozen during the investigation. The irony of my children using their misfortune as a pretext wasn't lost on me. "I'm perfectly capable of managing my affairs," I replied, keeping my voice measured. "Pleasant. The house has a state-of-the-art security system, and I'm hardly infirm." Cressida leaned forward, her manicured hands clasped in a gesture of false concern. "It's not about your capability, Mother. It's about being proactive, protecting your assets before something happens. Which is why," Thorne pulled a folder from his leather briefcase, "we've taken the liberty of consulting with Jameson and Associates about establishing a protective trust." The name hit me like ice water. Jameson and Associates wasn't just any law firm. They specialized in elder law and conservatorships, often representing families seeking to gain control over their aging relatives' estates. I had attended a charity function with Miriam Jameson last spring, where she had boasted about their success rate in competency hearings. "How thoughtful," I murmured, accepting the folder but not opening it. My eyes drifted to the orchid on the console table, its purple blooms nodding slightly in the draft from the heating vent. "And what exactly does this protective trust entail?" They exchanged a look, quick but loaded with meaning. Cressida took the lead, her courtroom voice sliding into place like a well-oiled lock. "It's quite simple, really. We would assume power of attorney over your financial decisions, ensuring that your assets are properly managed and protected. You would maintain full access to a generous monthly allowance, of course, and continue living here exactly as you do now. Think of it as insurance," Thorne added, his hedge fund manager persona emerging. "Markets are volatile. Scammers are increasingly sophisticated. We're just adding a layer of protection between you and potential threats." I sipped my tea, letting the bergamot scent fill my senses while I processed their words. The monthly allowance comment was particularly telling. They weren't just seeking oversight, they were planning to control the purse strings entirely. And this required immediate action because... Cressida's smile tightened imperceptibly. "We've already filed the preliminary paperwork. It's a complex process, and we wanted to handle the burden for you. All you need to do is sign." The room felt smaller suddenly, the walls of my ancestral home pressing in as I realized the scope of their betrayal. They hadn't come to discuss options. They had come to present a fait accompli. The recording device in the orchid was capturing every word, every subtle threat wrapped in filial concern. "I see." I set down my teacup with deliberate care. "And if I prefer to take some time to consider this arrangement?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Thorne's friendly mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something harder underneath. "Time isn't really on our side, Mother. The filing deadline is tomorrow, and with the Weatherby situation, the court is fast-tracking protective measures for vulnerable seniors in Ravenscroft Harbor." Vulnerable seniors. The words hung in the air like a noose. I was neither vulnerable nor senior by any reasonable definition, but they had clearly been laying groundwork for this narrative. I wondered how long they had been planning. How many conversations with neighbors and family friends had been carefully seeded with concerns about my isolation, my grief over Dimitri, my dedication to my orchids that might be construed as an unhealthy obsession. Well then, I stood, smoothing my cashmere cardigan. I suppose I should review these documents. Why don't you both stay for dinner? We can discuss this further over my coq au vin. Their relief was palpable, mistaking my accommodation for capitulation. They agreed readily, and I excused myself to the kitchen, where I immediately texted my accountant, Nora Blackwood, a sharp-minded woman who had managed my finances since Dimitri's death. Emergency. Need full audit all accounts. Possible fraud. Discretion essential. Her reply came within seconds. On it, initial review shows multiple unauthorized transfers past 72 hours. 2DTM moved to escrow accounts linked to Jameson and Associates. More details soon. My hands didn't shake as I prepared dinner, though rage simmered beneath my calm exterior like a volcano preparing to erupt. $2.8 million. They had already begun draining my accounts, confident that their power of attorney scheme would retroactively legitimize the theft. As I seasoned the chicken, I made a mental list of every contact, every resource, every piece of leverage I possessed. They thought they were dealing with a grief-addled widow puttering among her flowers. They were about to learn why Dimitri had always called me his warrior queen in silk gloves. Dinner was a performance worthy of the Ravenscroft Harbor Theater Society. I played the gracious hostess, asking about their work, their relationships, their plans for the holidays. They relaxed into their roles as devoted children, growing more animated with each glass of the excellent Bordeaux I poured. Neither noticed that my own glass remained virtually untouched. "You know," Cressida said, gesturing with her wine glass, "once everything is settled, we should really consider updating the house. Some of these antiques are worth a fortune, but they're not exactly practical." Thorne nodded enthusiastically. "And the greenhouse could be converted into an entertainment space. Imagine the parties we could throw." They were already dividing the spoils, parsing out my life's treasures like jackals over a carcass. I smiled and nodded, all while calculating my next moves. The recording device would have captured their premature celebration, their casual discussion of liquidating assets they didn't yet legally control. After they left, promising to return in the morning for the signatures, I retrieved the recorder and listened to their conversation during my brief absence in the kitchen. The words that emerged made my blood run cold. "She's easier to manipulate than I expected," Cressida had whispered. The grief angle was brilliant. Thorne's response was equally chilling. "Once we have control, we can start the competency proceedings. Dr. Whitmore already agreed to testify about her obsessive behavior with those damn plants. The timeline's perfect. 6 months from now, she'll be in assisted living and will have full control. The house alone is worth $8 million. Thank God she never remarried. No complications with inheritance." I saved the recording to multiple secure cloud servers and emailed copies to Nora, with instructions to share them with my attorney, Harrison Blackthorne, a former prosecutor who specialized in financial crimes. Then I made a series of phone calls that would set my own plan in motion. The next morning, I greeted Cressida and Thorne with fresh-baked scones and perfectly brewed coffee. They had brought reinforcements. Evelyn Jameson herself, a woman whose pearl necklace and sympathetic smile couldn't quite hide the predatory gleam in her eyes. "Mrs. Vance," she purred, extending a manicured hand. "Your children have told me so. Much about you? I understand you're ready to take this important step to protect your family's legacy." "Indeed," I replied, leading them to the formal dining room where I had arranged the signing ceremony with deliberate care. The documents were spread across the polished mahogany table, a Mont Blanc pen positioned precisely beside them. "I'm quite ready to address my family's legacy." As I sat down, I saw them exchange triumphant glances. Evelyn began explaining each document with practiced ease, her legal jargon designed to overwhelm and confuse. I nodded at appropriate intervals, asking just enough questions to maintain the illusion of careful consideration without actual resistance. "And this gives them full authority over all financial decisions?" I asked, my pen hovering over the signature line. "Complete authority," Evelyn confirmed, "with the court's blessing. It's really the most secure arrangement for someone in your situation." I smiled, thinking of the secure arrangements I had made during the sleepless night. The Ravenscroft Harbor Botanical Society's emergency board meeting that would convene in 2 hours. The forensic accountant already tracing the mysterious escrow accounts. The private investigator who had uncovered Thorne's massive gambling debts and Cressida's involvement in a legal malpractice suit that threatened her career. "Perfect," I said, and signed my name with a flourish. Their relief was almost comical. Cressida actually sighed aloud, while Thorne's shoulders visibly relaxed. Evelyn gathered the documents with efficient satisfaction, promising to file them immediately. "Now that that's settled," Thorne ventured, "about our monthly allowances from the trust." I raised an eyebrow. "Allowances? For managing your affairs?" Cressida explained quickly. "A standard executor fee, 15% of the trust's value annually, split between us. 15% of $12 million. $1.8 million a year for the privilege of stealing from their mother." The audacity was breathtaking. "Of course," I agreed pleasantly. "Though there is one small matter we should discuss first." Their wariness returned instantly. "What matter?" Cressida asked. I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table. "The college funds. I've been managing them separately, as you know. They're currently worth about $4 million each." Thorne's eyes lit up with unmistakable greed. "We should definitely roll those into the trust for protection." "Actually," I smiled, pressing play on my phone, "I thought you might find this recording interesting first." Their voices filled the room, tinny but unmistakable through the phone's speaker. Every damning word from the previous day's conversation, every callous plan, every calculation of my worth reduced to dollars and cents. The color drained from their faces as they listened to themselves plot my institutional imprisonment. "Evelyn." Jameson reached for her briefcase, but I held up a hand. "I wouldn't, Ms. Jameson. You see, in about 10 minutes, the Ravenscroft Harbor Police will be arriving with some questions about those escrow accounts. Something about fraudulent transfers and conspiracy to commit elder abuse." The doorbell rang, as if on cue. I rose, smoothing my skirt. That would be Detective Morrison. I called him last night after discovering the unauthorized transfers. "Did you know that attempting to steal from someone while filing false competency claims is a federal offense?" Cressida found her voice first, the lawyer in her scrambling for control. "Mother, this is all a misunderstanding. We were trying to protect you." "From what? My own judgment?" I let ice creep into my voice for the first time. "The only threats to my well-being are sitting at this table." The police entered, led by Detective Morrison, a tall man with kind eyes who had investigated the Weatherby case. Behind him came 2 federal agents, their badges gleaming under the chandelier's light. "Thessaly," Detective Morrison nodded to me before turning to my children. "Cressida Vance, Thorne Vance, Evelyn Jameson, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, and theft by deception." As they were led away in handcuffs, Cressida turned back, tears streaming down her face. "How could you do this to us? We're your children." I met her gaze steadily. "The same way you could plot to lock me away and steal my life's work. The difference is, I'm teaching you a lesson. You're just thieves who happen to share my DNA." The house fell silent after they left, but I wasn't alone. Nora Blackwood arrived, with a team of forensic accountants, and Harrison Blackthorne brought documents to freeze all the attempted transfers. By evening, every penny had been recovered, and the college funds I mentioned, they never existed. I had created that fiction, to see if their greed extended even to money they believed was already designated for specific purposes. It had, spectacularly. But the real justice came later, in small, poetic doses. Cressida was disbarred after the scandal broke, her legal career destroyed by the very laws she had tried to manipulate. Thorne's hedge fund collapsed when investors fled, unwilling to trust their money to someone who would steal from his own mother. Evelyn Jameson's firm faced a class-action lawsuit from other families she had helped defraud. I used a portion of the recovered funds to establish the Dimitri Vance Foundation for Elder Protection, dedicated to preventing financial abuse of seniors. The Weatherbys became its first beneficiaries, their stolen money recovered through our legal team. The foundation's first major donor? An anonymous benefactor who signed their check with a simple drawing of an orchid. 6 months later, as spring returned to Ravenscroft Harbor, I stood in my greenhouse surrounded by blooming orchids, each one a testament to patience, careful nurturing, and the strength that comes from deep roots. The doorbell rang, and I found a young woman on my doorstep, her eyes red from crying. "Mrs. Vance? I'm Cordelia Thorne's daughter, your granddaughter. I just found out what my father did, and I wanted to say how sorry I am. I had no idea." I studied her face, seeing echoes of the boy Thorne had been before greed consumed him. Sometimes the apple does fall far from the tree. "Come in, dear. Let me show you the orchids. There's a particularly beautiful dendrobium I've been saving for someone special." The Vance family legacy would continue, but on my terms, with the wisdom. That love sometimes means knowing when to cut away the diseased parts to save the whole. The twins served 2 years in federal prison, their early release contingent on paying full restitution and completing 2,000 hours of community service at nursing homes, where they would learn firsthand about the vulnerability they had tried to exploit. The last time I saw them was at their father's grave on the 10th anniversary of his death. They approached hesitantly, designer clothes replaced by humbler attire, their faces showing the wear of hard lessons learned. We didn't embrace or exchange tearful apologies. Instead, Cressida placed a single orchid on the headstone, a cutting from a plant I had given her as a child, somehow kept alive through her imprisonment. "I took good care of it," she said quietly, "like you taught me when I was little." "Sometimes, love isn't forgiveness," I replied. "Sometimes it's simply acknowledging what was lost and choosing to grow something new in its place." Thorne nodded, his hand resting briefly on the gravestone. "We've started a financial literacy program for seniors. It's small, but it's honest work. I left them there with their father, knowing that redemption, like orchids, requires time, patience, and the right conditions to bloom." The recording device that had captured their betrayal now held different conversations, documenting the slow, painful process of a family learning to be human again. As for me, I still tend my orchids, still live in Wildrose Manor, and still serve on the board of the Ravenscroft Harbor Botanical Society. But now I also run workshops on financial self-protection, sharing my story as a cautionary tale and a beacon of hope. Because in the end, the greatest revenge isn't destroying those who wrong us. It's transforming their betrayal into something that protects others from suffering the same fate. And sometimes, just sometimes, it's leaving the door open just wide, enough for redemption to find its way home. The weeks following their arrest became a masterclass in watching carefully constructed facades crumble. I maintained my daily routines, tending to my orchids and attending the Ravenscroft Harbor social functions, but now with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had finally shed a tremendous burden. The greenhouse became my sanctuary, where I could process the magnitude of what had transpired while nurturing new life from seemingly dormant bulbs. Nora Blackwood proved invaluable during this period, her forensic accounting skills revealing the true extent of my children's deception. They had been planning this coup for over 18 months, gradually building a paper trail that painted me as increasingly erratic and isolated. Cressida had even convinced Dr. Whitmore to backdate several psychological evaluations, documents that now served as evidence in the growing case against them. The irony wasn't lost on me that their meticulous planning became their undoing. Every forged document, every manipulated conversation, every orchestrated encounter with concerned neighbors had been carefully archived by them as future evidence of my supposed decline. Instead, it created a perfect timeline of their conspiracy. One morning, as I was transplanting a rare Paphiopedilum orchid, Detective Morrison arrived with news that shook even my carefully maintained composure. "We found something else, Mrs. Vance," he said, accepting the cup of tea I offered. "Your late husband's death. There are some irregularities we need to discuss." My hands stilled on the delicate roots I had been examining. Dimitri had died of a heart attack during a business trip to Singapore. The autopsy had been conclusive, the circumstances unremarkable for a man of 55 who worked under constant stress. "What kind of irregularities?" Morrison pulled out a file, his expression grave. "We discovered a series of emails between your son and a contact in Singapore. They discussed certain medications that could trigger cardiac events in someone with your husband's medical history. The timeline. It's concerning." The greenhouse suddenly felt arctic despite the carefully controlled temperature. I sank onto my potting bench, the implications washing over me like ice water. They were barely 25 when Dimitri died, still in graduate school, still seemingly devoted children who rushed home to comfort their grieving mother. "Is there enough evidence to prosecute?" My voice sounded foreign to my own ears, hollow and distant. "Not yet," Morrison admitted. "But we're working with Interpol. The Singapore authorities are reopening their investigation. That afternoon, I canceled my appointments and spent hours among my orchids, seeking solace in their silent beauty. Each bloom represented patience, careful cultivation, the reward for attentive care. How had I failed so spectacularly with my own children? When had their souls withered while I was focused on providing every material advantage? The answer came during their bail hearing, which I attended despite Harrison Blackthorne's advice to stay away. Sitting in that courtroom, watching them in their orange jumpsuits, I finally saw the truth. They weren't my failures. They were their own architects of destruction. Every choice had been theirs. Every moral compromise a step on a path they had chosen willingly. Cressida's defense attorney painted her as a devoted daughter, manipulated by a domineering brother, while Thorne's lawyer claimed he was struggling with a gambling addiction that clouded his judgment. But when the prosecutor played the recording from my orchid, their own words condemned them more effectively than any testimony could. Bail was denied. The judge, Margaret Hollowell, a woman I knew from the garden club, declared them flight risks, given their international connections and the severity of the charges. As they were led away, neither looked in my direction. Perhaps they couldn't bear to face the mother they had plotted to destroy, or perhaps I had already ceased to exist in their world except as an obstacle to wealth. The months that followed brought revelation after revelation. Forensic accountants uncovered offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, shell corporations designed to hide assets, and a web of financial manipulation that stretched back years. They had been siphoning money from Dimitri's company long before his death, using their positions as minority shareholders to authorize transfers that appeared legitimate, but ultimately lined their pockets. I threw myself into establishing the foundation, channeling my energy into something constructive rather than dwelling on the magnitude of their betrayal. The Weatherbys became invaluable allies, their experience helping us identify the warning signs of financial elder abuse. We created educational programs, offered free legal consultations, and established a hotline for seniors who suspected they were being exploited. The media attention was unavoidable. Ravenscroft Harbor hadn't seen a scandal of this magnitude since the lighthouse keeper's wife ran away with a traveling Shakespeare troupe in 1847. Reporters camped outside Wildrose Manor, their cameras capturing every coming and going, their questions growing more invasive with each passing day. I gave exactly one interview to Margot Sinclair from the Harbor Gazette, a woman whose integrity I had long admired. We sat in my greenhouse, surrounded by blooming cymbidiums, as I told my story with careful precision. "What would you say to other parents who might be facing similar situations?" she asked, her pen poised over her notebook. "Trust, but verify," I replied, my fingers ghosting over the petals of a nearby orchid. Love doesn't require blindness. Sometimes the greatest act of love is holding someone accountable for their actions, no matter how painful that might be. The article ran with the headline, "The Orchid Queen's Last Stand," a title that made me cringe but captured the public imagination. Letters poured in from across the country, stories of similar betrayals, gratitude for my courage, requests for advice. I answered each one personally, finding unexpected healing in connecting with others who understood the unique pain of familial betrayal. 6 months into their incarceration, I received a letter from Thorne. His handwriting, once bold and confident, now appeared shaky and uncertain. The pages were filled with apologies, explanations, and requests for forgiveness. But one line stood out. "I know now that we killed everything that mattered chasing things that don't." I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I spent a week contemplating my reply while working on a particularly challenging Vanda orchid that had refused to bloom for 3 seasons. As I adjusted its care regimen, patience rewarding me with the first signs of a flower spike, I realized what I needed to say. My response was brief. Understanding isn't absolution. Growth requires acknowledging the depth of the damage caused. Your father's death haunts me now in ways it never did before. If you seek forgiveness, start by confronting the full truth of your actions, not just the convenient parts. Cressida's letter arrived a month later, typed on prison stationery, with the precision of someone who still couldn't fully let go of control. She detailed her legal strategy for appeal, her plans for rebuilding her career after serving her sentence, her analysis of where their plan had gone wrong. Not once did she expressed genuine remorse or acknowledge the emotional devastation they had caused. I filed it away without responding, recognizing that she still viewed our relationship as a transaction rather than a bond. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I testified for 2 days, my voice steady as I recounted discovering their betrayal, playing the recording, watching my life's work nearly disappear into accounts controlled by strangers. The defense attorneys tried to paint me as vindictive, claiming I had orchestrated an elaborate entrapment scheme, but the evidence spoke louder than their theatrics. When the verdicts came, guilty on all counts, I felt no triumph, only a profound sense of completion. Cressida received 7 years, Thorne 5, with the possibility of early release contingent on restitution and extensive community service. The judge's sentencing remarks included a scathing condemnation of their abuse of trust, particularly given their privileged upbringing and education. That evening, I hosted a dinner party at Wildrose Manor, the first since Dimitri's death. The IA Weatherbys came, along with Detective Morrison and his wife, Nora Blackwood, Harrison Blackthorne, and several members of the Botanical Society. We dined on coq au vin, the same meal I had prepared the night I discovered the full extent of my children's betrayal. But this time, the atmosphere was one of celebration rather than deception. As we raised our glasses in a toast to justice and new beginnings, Harold Weatherby stood, his voice thick with emotion. To Thessaly, who showed us that strength isn't about never being vulnerable, but about choosing how we respond to those who exploit our trust. The foundation flourished beyond my wildest expectations. Within a year, we had chapters in 6 states, a team of volunteer attorneys, and a track record of recovering millions in stolen assets. I traveled frequently, speaking at conferences and training law enforcement officials on recognizing the signs of financial elder abuse. The irony that my children's betrayal had given me a new purpose wasn't lost on me. During one such conference, in Boston, I received word that Thorne had requested a visit. He was being held at a federal facility just outside the city, and after much deliberation, I agreed to see him. The man who sat across from me in the sterile visiting room bore little resemblance to the polished hedge fund manager who had plotted my downfall. Prison had stripped away his artifice, leaving someone rawer, more authentic than I had seen since his childhood. "I've been attending therapy," he said, his hands folded on the metal table between us, "trying to understand how I became someone capable of everything we did. The therapist says it started long before Dad died. The entitlement, the belief that we deserved everything without earning it." I studied his face, searching for signs of manipulation, but finding only exhaustion and what appeared to be genuine introspection. "And what conclusions have you reached?" "That I confused material success with love. That every time you bailed me out, I saw it as weakness rather than generosity. That I viewed Dad's death as an opportunity rather than a tragedy." His voice cracked on the last word, and for the first time since his arrest, I saw tears in his eyes. I think we might have actually done it, arranged his death. I can't remember clearly, but there are fragments. Conversations with Cressida, researching his medications. The confession, halting and incomplete as it was, shattered something inside me. I had suspected, especially after Detective Morrison's revelation, but hearing it from Thorne's own lips made it real in a way that speculation never could. The boy I had carried in my womb, whose first steps I had celebrated, whose scraped knees I had bandaged, had possibly orchestrated his father's murder for money. "I need you to tell Detective Morrison everything you remember," I said quietly. "Not for my sake, but for yours. You'll never find peace carrying this secret." He nodded, tears now flowing freely. "I don't expect forgiveness. I needed you to know that I finally understand the monster I became." I left that prison visiting room feeling simultaneously lighter and heavier. Lighter because truth, no matter how painful, is preferable to uncertainty. Heavier because now I carried the confirmed knowledge that I had raised not just thieves, but possibly murderers. The investigation into Dimitri's death reopened with Thorne's cooperation. He provided fragments of memory, half-remembered conversations, and email passwords that led investigators to a trail of digital evidence previously overlooked. Cressida, when confronted with her brother's confession, maintained her innocence with the same cool detachment she had shown throughout the trial. But investigators found enough circumstantial evidence to bring charges in Singapore, where the death penalty still existed for premeditated murder. The extradition proceedings were complex, hampered by international law and the passage of time. During this period, I found myself in the peculiar position of advocating for my daughter's life, while simultaneously ensuring she faced justice for potentially ending her father's. The moral complexity of the situation would have broken me earlier, but the foundation work had taught me that justice and mercy could coexist, even when they seemed at odds. I hired the best international law firm to ensure Cressida received fair treatment while making it clear I would not interfere with the legal process. The Singapore authorities eventually agreed to try her in absentia, given she was already serving a sentence in the United States. The trial revealed a chilling level of premeditation, including research into undetectable poisons and careful timing to coincide with Dimitri's high-stress business negotiations. She was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment, to be served consecutively with her current sentence. When the verdict was announced, I was tending to a new orchid hybrid I had been developing, a delicate cross between a dendrobium and a phalaenopsis that seemed impossible until it bloomed with ethereal beauty. The metaphor wasn't lost on me, something beautiful emerging from seemingly incompatible elements. Thorne's cooperation earned him a reduced sentence on the conspiracy charges, but added years for his role in Dimitri's death. He accepted the judgment, without appeal, something his attorney told me was unprecedented in his experience. During our increasingly regular correspondence, Thorne shared his journey through therapy, his work with the prison's financial literacy program, and his growing understanding of the devastating ripple effects of their actions. The turning point in our relationship came 3 years into his sentence when he sent me a package on my birthday. Inside was a small, hand-carved wooden box containing a single orchid seed pod and a note. "I've been studying botany in the prison library. This is from the orchid you gave me when I was 10, the one I forgot to water until it died. A fellow inmate who works in the greenhouse helped me pollinate it. Maybe something good can grow from old mistakes." The gesture moved me more than any of his previous apologies. It showed patience, dedication, and an understanding of what truly mattered to me. I planted the seeds in my greenhouse, nurturing them with the same care I gave all my orchids, watching as they slowly developed into seedlings. Like forgiveness, orchids couldn't be rushed. They bloomed on their own schedule, requiring consistent care in the right conditions. 5 years after their initial arrest, Thorne was released on parole, required to live in a halfway house and maintain employment while continuing therapy and community service. He found work at a nonprofit financial counseling center, using his experience to help people avoid the kind of debt that had contributed to his downfall. His first visit to Wildrose Manor was awkward, both of us navigating the strange territory between mother and son, victim and perpetrator, past and potential future. We walked through the greenhouse, where I showed him the thriving seedlings from his gift. Some had already bloomed, their delicate flowers a testament to the possibility of renewal. As we stood among the orchids, he asked the question I had been expecting: "Can we ever be a family again?" I considered my answer carefully, my fingers brushing the petals of a nearby cattleya. Family isn't just biology or history, it's a choice we make every day through our actions. You're choosing differently now. That's a beginning, not an ending. Cressida remained unrepentant, her letters increasingly bitter as her appeals failed, and her sentence stretched toward a lifetime behind bars. She accused me of destroying her life, claimed Thorne had lied to curry favor, and insisted she was the victim of a miscarriage of justice. I continued to ensure she had adequate legal representation while maintaining my distance, recognizing that some wounds were too deep to heal, some betrayals too fundamental to overcome. The foundation expanded internationally, partnering with organizations in Singapore, where Dimitri's case had raised awareness about similar crimes. We established the Dimitri Vance Memorial Lecture Series, bringing together legal experts, financial advisors, and mental health professionals to discuss the intersection of family, money, and criminal behavior. It felt like an appropriate tribute to a man whose death had ultimately exposed a network of deception that might have otherwise continued unchecked. On the 10th anniversary of discovering their betrayal, I hosted a gala at Wildrose Manor to celebrate the Foundation's achievements. The guest list included beneficiaries who had recovered their assets, volunteers who had dedicated countless hours to our cause, and law enforcement officials who had investigated hundreds of cases based on our educational materials. Thorne attended, now a respected counselor in his own right, his presence a complicated but genuine symbol of the possibility of redemption. As I stood at the podium, surrounded by people whose lives had been touched by our work, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment. My orchids, displayed throughout the ballroom, seemed to glow under the chandeliers, their beauty a reminder that sometimes the most magnificent blooms emerge from the darkest periods of dormancy. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice carrying across the room with hard-won authority, 10 years ago, I discovered that the people I trusted most had betrayed me in ways I couldn't have imagined. That discovery could have destroyed me. Instead, it became the catalyst for something larger than personal pain or family drama. It became a movement to protect others from similar harm. The applause that followed felt like validation, not just of the Foundation's work, but of the choice I had made to transform betrayal into purpose. As the evening progressed, filled with speeches, testimonials, and pledges of continued support. I found myself in the greenhouse for a moment of solitude. The newest generation of orchids was beginning to bloom, including several from Thorne's seeds, their unique genetics creating flowers unlike any I had seen before. Cordelia found me there, as she often did during family gatherings. My granddaughter had become a regular presence in my life. Her own relationship with her parents complicated, but her bond with me growing stronger each year. She had inherited my love for orchids and was studying botany at university, planning to specialize in conservation of endangered species. "Grandmother," she said, using the formal title she had adopted out of respect, "do you ever regret what happened? The way it all unfolded?" I considered her question while adjusting the humidity level for a temperamental Mazdavalia. Regret is too simple a word for something so complex. I regret that your father and aunt chose the path they did. I regret not seeing the signs earlier. But I don't regret holding them accountable. Sometimes love means allowing people to face the consequences of their actions. She nodded, wise beyond her 23 years. I've been thinking about forgiveness lately. How it's not really about the person who hurt you, but about freeing yourself from the weight of anger. "You sound like your therapist," I said with a gentle smile, recognizing the echo of wisdom I had also learned through years of counseling. "Maybe. But I also sound like you. The way you've handled everything. It's taught me that strength isn't about avoiding pain, but about choosing what to do with it." That night, after the last guest had departed and the catering staff had cleaned up, I sat in my study reviewing the Foundation's latest financial report. We had recovered over $50 million in stolen assets, helped prosecute 300 cases of elder financial abuse, and educated thousands of seniors about protecting themselves. The numbers were impressive, but they didn't capture the real impact, the lives saved from financial ruin. The families spared the devastation of betrayal, the dignity preserved for vulnerable elders. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Thorne stood in the doorway, his bow tie loosened, holding 2 glasses of wine. "Thought you might like some company," he offered hesitantly. I gestured to the chair across from me, accepting the glass. We sat in comfortable silence for a while. The weight of shared history balanced against the possibility of a different future. "I've been sober for 3 years now," he said finally. "Part of the recovery process is making amends, but I know some things can't be fixed with apologies." "No, they can't," I agreed. "But they can be acknowledged. And sometimes, that's enough to begin building something new." We talked late into the night, not about the past or the pain, but about the future. His work at the counseling center, my plans for expanding the foundation, Cordelia's research project on orchid genetics. It felt almost normal, like the conversations we might have had if our path had been different, if greed hadn't poisoned our family's roots. As dawn approached, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold reminiscent of my rarest orchids, I walked Thorne to the door. He paused on the threshold, looking back at the home where he had grown up, where he had plotted its theft, and where he now stood as a changed man seeking redemption. "Thank you," he said simply, "for not giving up on the possibility of change." I watched him drive away, then returned to my greenhouse to check on the night-blooming orchids that were just closing their petals as the sun rose. Among them was a specimen I had named Redemption's Promise, bred from the seeds Thorne had sent from prison. Its flowers were spectacular, white petals edged with deep purple, a visual representation of how beauty could emerge from the darkest circumstances. As I tended to my plants, I reflected on the truth that had taken me 68 years to fully understand. Love wasn't just about giving freely or forgiving easily. Sometimes it was about setting boundaries so firm they shattered relationships. Sometimes it was about choosing justice over comfort, truth over harmony. And sometimes, just sometimes, it was about leaving the door open just wide enough for those who had lost their way to find their way back, changed and chastened, ready to earn what they had once tried to steal. The morning light illuminated the greenhouse, casting rainbow patterns through the glass panels onto the countless orchids below. Each one represented patience, care, and the belief that with the right conditions, even the most unlikely seeds could bloom into something extraordinary. As I picked up my watering can to begin the day's routine, I smiled at the thought that perhaps the same could be said for people, even those who had once plotted to destroy everything I held dear. My phone buzzed with a message from Cordelia. "Coffee later. Want to discuss the Foundation's youth outreach program. Also, Dad asked me to give you this." Attached was a photo of a small orchid cutting, carefully potted and labeled in Thorne's now familiar handwriting. "For the woman who taught me that some things are worth waiting for." I typed back quickly. "Coffee sounds perfect. Bring the cutting. Let's see what we can grow together." The future stretched ahead, uncertain, but no longer feared. I had learned that strength wasn't about avoiding betrayal, but about choosing how to respond when it inevitably came. My children had taught me that lesson in the harshest way possible, but in doing so, they had inadvertently given me the tools to help countless others avoid similar fates. Perhaps that was its own form of redemption, written not in apologies or legal documents, but in the lives touched and protected by our painful history. As the day began in earnest, with emails to answer and foundation work to coordinate, I allowed myself one moment of pure satisfaction. The woman who had once been marked as an easy victim, who had been plotted against by her own flesh and blood, had not only survived, but flourished. Like my hardiest orchids, I had adapted to harsh conditions and bloomed anyway, creating beauty from betrayal and purpose from pain. And if that wasn't the sweetest revenge of all, I couldn't imagine what was. The morning I discovered the second. Betrayal started like any other, with me pruning dead blooms from my cymbidiums while listening to a gardening podcast. But when Detective Morrison called asking to meet immediately, his tone carrying an urgency I hadn't heard since the original investigation, I knew my carefully reconstructed piece was about to shatter again. "We need to discuss your late husband's business partners," he said when he arrived, declining my offer of tea. Specifically, the Zhao family in Singapore. The Zhao family had been Dimitri's closest associates in Asia, instrumental in expanding his shipping empire across the Pacific. After his death, they had sent an enormous floral arrangement and a personal note of condolence that I'd kept in my desk drawer. "What about them?" Morrison pulled out a tablet, swiping through documents that made my blood run cold. "It appears your children weren't the only ones with access to information about Dimitri's heart condition. We've uncovered communications between Cressida and Victoria Zhao dating back 5 years before your husband's death." Victoria Zhao. I remembered her from corporate dinners, an elegant woman who spoke 5 languages and had an MBA from Wharton. She had always been particularly interested in Cressida's legal career, often pulling my daughter aside for private conversations I'd attributed to professional networking. "They were planning something much bigger than just your estate," Morrison continued. "The Zhao family has been systematically acquiring shares in your husband's company through shell corporations. With Dimitri gone and your children in prison, they're positioned for a complete takeover." I stood abruptly, walking to my orchid wall where hundreds of blooms created a living tapestry of color. Each plant represented years of patience, careful cultivation, the understanding that beauty often emerged from adversity. "Are you telling me my husband's death wasn't just about inheritance? We believe it was about corporate control. The Zhaos couldn't force Dimitri out while he was alive, so they found willing partners in your children. The inheritance plot was real, but it was also a smokescreen for a larger conspiracy." That afternoon, I convened an emergency meeting with the Foundation's board of directors. What had started as a personal betrayal had morphed into something that threatened hundreds of jobs and the legacy Dimitri had spent his life building. As I laid out the facts Morrison had shared, watching the shock ripple across familiar faces, I felt a familiar surge of determination. "We're not just fighting for my family's assets anymore," I declared. "We're fighting for every employee, every shareholder, every person who believed in what Dimitri built." Nora Blackwood, now the Foundation's chief financial officer, was already pulling up corporate records on her laptop. The Zayas control 37% through various holdings. With the shares that defaulted to the company after Dimitri's death, they're dangerously close to a majority position. What they don't have, Harrison Blackthorne interjected, his legal mind already working through the implications, is Thessaly's voting rights as the primary beneficiary of Dimitri's estate. And thanks to the criminal proceedings, Cressida and Thorne's shares are frozen. The next months became a chess match played across boardrooms and courtrooms. The Zhaos launched a proxy fight, claiming mismanagement and demanding representation on the board of directors. I responded by hiring a team of forensic accountants who uncovered a pattern of systematic theft dating back to when Dimitri was still alive. Inventory mysteriously disappearing from Singapore warehouses, shipping, routes diverted to benefit Zhao-owned competitors, contracts deliberately sabotaged. The most damaging discovery came when we found emails between Victoria Zhao and Cressida discussing Project Orchid, their code name for the long-term plan to eliminate Dimitri and seize control of his company. The name felt like a personal insult, corrupting something I held sacred with their greed. Your father trusted them like family, I told Cressida during a video call to the prison, her face pixelated on the screen, but her lack of remorse crystal clear. How could you conspire with them against your own blood? Blood meant nothing to him, she spat back. He was going to write us out of the will completely. The Zhaos offered us a way to secure our future. You think you're so noble, Mother, but you're just naive. This is how real business works. I ended the call, her words echoing in my mind. Perhaps she was right about my naivety, but if being sophisticated meant orchestrating murders and betraying every principle of human decency, I preferred to remain unsophisticated. The legal battle intensified when the Zhaos filed suit claiming that Dimitri's company had breached numerous contracts after his death. Their lawyers, an army of sharp-suited professionals from 3 continents, attempted to overwhelm us with paperwork and procedural maneuvers. But they hadn't counted on the network I'd built through the foundation, elderly shareholders who rallied to support me, former employees who came forward with evidence of the Zhaos misconduct, even competitors who despised Dimitri's business practices but respected his integrity. During a particularly contentious deposition, Victoria Zhao sat across from me, her designer suit impeccable, her expression cold as carved marble. Your husband was weak, she said when the lawyers stepped. Out for a break. Sentimental. He could have ruled the shipping industry, but he insisted on fair wages and environmental protections. Bad for business. Bad for your business, I corrected. Dimitri built something sustainable. You're trying to gut it for short-term profit. She laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. You sound just like him. Look where his principles got him. Dead in a hotel room, his own children celebrating his demise. That night, alone in my greenhouse, I tended to my most delicate orchids while processing the day's revelations. The Phalaenopsis amabilis, with its pure white blooms, reminded me of Dimitri's integrity. He had built his empire on handshake deals and mutual respect, values that seemed antiquated in today's corporate landscape, but had earned him loyal allies who were now emerging to defend his legacy. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. My granddaughter Cordelia entered, carrying a thermos of tea and a concerned expression. I heard about the deposition, she said, settling beside me on the wooden bench. Are you all right? I accepted the tea, gratefully, its warmth a comfort against the evening chill. Your grandfather wasn't perfect, but he was honorable. These people are trying to rewrite history, to make his decency seem like weakness. Maybe that's exactly why we need to fight them, she suggested, not just for the company, but for the idea that business doesn't have to be ruthless to be successful. Her words sparked something in me. The next morning, I called an emergency board meeting and proposed a radical strategy. Instead of fighting the Zhao solely in court, we would take our case to the public. Dimitri's company had always prided itself on transparency and ethical practices. It was time to contrast that legacy with the Zhao's pattern of exploitation and corruption. We launched a media campaign highlighting the differences between Dimitri's vision and the Zhao's proposed changes. Former employees shared stories of how Dimitri had supported them through personal crises. Environmental groups testified about his pioneering efforts to reduce shipping emissions. Labor organizations praised his fair wage policies. The narrative began to shift from a corporate power struggle to a battle for the soul of ethical business. The Zhao's responded by intensifying their legal assault, filing injunctions, and claiming defamation. But public opinion had turned against them, and several institutional investors began questioning their association with the takeover attempt. When a major pension fund announced it would vote against the Zhao proposals, citing concerns about corporate governance, I knew the tide was turning. During this period, I received an unexpected letter from Thorne. Unlike his previous correspondence, filled with apologies and updates on his rehabilitation, this one contained detailed information about offshore accounts and hidden transactions between Cressida and the Zhao's. I know I've lost the right to ask for your trust, he wrote, but I can't let them destroy everything Dad built. These documents show how deep the conspiracy went. Cressida was getting paid through a Cayman Islands account for every piece of inside information she provided. The Zhao's were planning to strip the company's assets and sell off the pieces to their competitors. Dad's death was just the first step. I shared the information with our legal team, who verified its authenticity through forensic accounting. The evidence was damning, a clear trail of payments linking Cressida to corporate espionage and conspiracy to commit murder. More importantly, it revealed that several current board members had been receiving bribes to support the Zhao takeover. The boardroom showdown came 6 months after Morrison first revealed the conspiracy. Victoria Zhao arrived with her phalanx of lawyers, confident in her impending victory. But as the meeting progressed and I systematically presented evidence of bribery, fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder, her composure cracked. "These are fabrications," she hissed when I displayed the offshore account records. "Your convicted children are hardly credible witnesses." "Perhaps not," I conceded, then turned to address the room. "But bank records don't lie. Neither do the testimonies of former employees who were pressured to falsify shipping manifests, or the environmental reports you suppressed, or the safety violations you covered up." The vote wasn't even close. The board unanimously rejected the Zhao proposals and voted to pursue criminal charges for the fraud uncovered during our investigation. As security escorted Victoria and her lawyers from the building, she turned to me with undisguised hatred. "You think you've won? This isn't over. We have resources you can't imagine." "So did my children," I replied calmly. "And look where they are, now." The aftermath of the boardroom victory brought new challenges. The Zhao's launched a vicious campaign of retaliation, filing lawsuits in multiple jurisdictions, attempting to sabotage our shipping routes, even trying to poach key employees. But for every attack, we found allies willing to stand with us. Competitors who had respected Dimitri offered to share shipping lanes. Former employees returned to help stabilize operations. Environmental groups provided pro bono legal support. Through it all, I maintained my daily ritual of tending to my orchids. The greenhouse became my war room, where I would strategize with lawyers while repotting dendrobiums, or review financial documents while adjusting humidity levels for my vandas. The parallel between nurturing delicate plants and protecting AI business legacy wasn't lost on me. Both required patience, vigilance, and the wisdom to know when to prune away the diseased parts. Cordelia often joined me during these sessions, her youthful perspective providing valuable insights. One evening, as we grafted new shoots onto established root systems, she made an observation that shifted my entire approach to the crisis. "You know what's interesting about orchids?" she mused, carefully wrapping the graft union. "They're not just beautiful, they're incredibly resilient. They adapt to harsh conditions, form symbiotic relationships, even develop new survival strategies when threatened. Like companies, I realized aloud. The ones that survive aren't necessarily the biggest or most aggressive, but the ones that can adapt and build genuine partnerships. This insight led to a complete restructuring of Dimitri's company. Instead of simply defending against the Zhao attacks, we went on the offensive by doubling down on the values that had made the business successful. We increased profit sharing with employees, expanded our environmental initiatives, and formed strategic alliances with ethical competitors. The company became a case study in stakeholder capitalism, proof that businesses could thrive without sacrificing their principles. The legal proceedings against the Zhaos stretched on for 2 years, during which time more evidence of their criminal activities surfaced. International law enforcement agencies joined the investigation, uncovering a network of corruption that extended far beyond our company. Several Zhao family members were arrested, their assets frozen, their reputation in tatters. Victoria Zhao herself faced extradition to Singapore on murder conspiracy charges. During her final court appearance before being transported overseas, she looked directly at me, her once proud demeanor replaced by something hollow and defeated. "You destroyed my family," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "No," I replied, thinking of my own children behind bars, my husband in his grave. "We both did that to ourselves. The difference is, I'm trying to build something from the ashes." As the Zhao Empire crumbled, Dimitri's company flourished. We expanded into new markets, always maintaining the ethical standards he had established. The foundation grew as well, our programs preventing countless cases of elder financial abuse, while also addressing corporate corruption and white-collar crime. On the 5th anniversary of discovering my children's betrayal, I found myself standing before a gathering of business leaders, environmentalists, and social justice advocates. The venue was the grand ballroom of the Singapore Raffles Hotel, where Dimitri had died. I had initially resisted holding the event there, but Cordelia convinced me it was important to reclaim the space, to transform a site of tragedy into a symbol of renewal. When I founded the Dimitri Vance Foundation, I began my speech, a spotlight illuminating the podium while images of our work projected on screens behind me. I thought I was simply trying to prevent others from experiencing the betrayal I had suffered. But this journey has taught me that the real work isn't just about protection, it's about transformation. We must transform our pain into purpose, our losses into lessons, our betrayals into bridges toward a more just and compassionate world. The audience rose in sustained applause, but my eyes were drawn to a figure in the back of the room. Thorne stood there, his prison sentence completed, his parole obligations fulfilled. He had been working with at-risk youth, teaching financial literacy in community centers, slowly rebuilding a life based on service rather than greed. After the formal presentation, as guests mingled over champagne and canapes, Thorne approached. He looked different, not just older, but somehow more substantial, as if prison had burned away the superficial charm to reveal something genuine underneath. "I wanted to thank you," he said, his voice steady but emotional. "Not for forgiving me. I know that may never come, but for showing me that it's possible to build something meaningful from ruins." I studied my son, searching for signs of the manipulator he had once been, but finding only hard-won humility. Forgiveness isn't a single act, Thorne. It's a process, like growing orchids. It requires the right conditions, constant care, and most importantly, evidence of genuine change. He nodded, understanding the metaphor. "I've been studying botany, following your example. There's something profound about nurturing life after being responsible for taking it." He paused, swallowing hard. "I testified against the Zeos last month, told them everything about our conspiracy with them. It won't bring Dad back, but maybe it helps balance the scales slightly." That night, alone in my hotel room overlooking Singapore's glittering skyline, I video called Cressida in prison. She had maintained her silence throughout the Zhao investigation, refusing to cooperate even when offered reduced sentences. Her loyalty to her co-conspirators seemed to be the only principle she had left. "The Zhaos are finished," I informed her, watching her face for any reaction. "Their empire is crumbling. Several family members are facing life sentences. Was it worth it?" She stared at me through the screen, her once polished appearance now stripped to institutional basics. "You'll never understand, Mother. Power is the only thing that matters in this world. Everything else is just pretty fiction we tell ourselves." "Is that what you tell yourself in your cell at night? That power was worth murdering your father? Worth destroying your relationship with everyone who ever loved you?" "Love is just another word for weakness," she spat back. "Look where it got you, alone in your greenhouse with your precious flowers while real players shaped the world." I smiled sadly, thinking of the hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by the Foundation, the company that now thrived under ethical leadership, the gradual restoration of my relationship with Thorne. "If this is what weakness looks like, Cressida, I'll choose it every time over your version of strength." After ending the call, I opened my laptop to review the latest Foundation reports. We had expanded into 15 countries, recovered over 200 million in stolen assets, and trained thousands of law enforcement officers in financial crime detection. But the numbers that gave me the most satisfaction were smaller, more personal. The elderly couple in Maine who kept their home, the widow in Texas who recovered her life savings, the grandfather in California who avoided being declared incompetent by his greedy relatives. My phone buzzed with a text from Cordelia. "Grandmother, I've been accepted into the doctoral program in botanical conservation at Cambridge. Also, Dad and I are working on a proposal for a youth entrepreneurship program that combines business, ethics with environmental stewardship. Can we discuss over lunch tomorrow?" I typed back quickly, "Congratulations on Cambridge. Lunch sounds perfect. Bring your proposal, and your father if he's free. Some bridges are worth rebuilding." The next morning, I visited a local orchid nursery, searching for specimens to add to my collection back home. The owner, an elderly gentleman named Chen, recognized me from news coverage of the Zhao trial. "You have given many people hope," he said in careful English, showing me a rare Paphiopedilum Victoria regina. "That business can be honorable, that justice can prevail." I examined the orchid, its distinctive slipper-shaped bloom, a marvel of natural engineering. "Hope is like this flower, Mr. Chen. It requires patience and the right conditions, but once established, it's remarkably resilient." He smiled, wrapping the plant carefully for transport. "Your husband would be proud, not just of what you've preserved, but of what you've built from the ashes." That afternoon, over dim sum with Cordelia and Thorne, we discussed their youth entrepreneurship proposal. The concept was brilliant, pairing at-risk teenagers with ethical business mentors while incorporating environmental sustainability into every aspect of the curriculum. As they explained their vision, finishing each other's sentences with an enthusiasm I hadn't seen since their childhood, I felt something shift inside me. The three of us spent the rest of the day visiting potential program sites, meeting with education officials, and refining the proposal. By evening, we had a comprehensive plan that would pilot in 3 cities before expanding nationally. The Foundation Board approved funding the following week, with several corporate partners offering additional support. 6 months later, at the program's launch event, I watched Thorne address a room full of teenagers from disadvantaged backgrounds. His words carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom. "I stand here not as a success story, but as a cautionary tale with a second chance. I once believed that wealth was the only measure of worth, that taking shortcuts was smart business. I was wrong. Real success isn't about what you can take. It's about what you can build that lasts beyond your own lifetime." After his speech, one of the students approached me. "My dad's in prison for fraud," she confided, her voice barely audible. "Everyone says I'll end up the same way, but listening to your son. Maybe there's another path. I took her hand gently. There's always another path, dear. Sometimes we just need help finding it. As the months passed, the youth program exceeded all expectations. Participants launched small businesses focused on solving community problems. Several developed innovative, environmental solutions that caught the attention of impact investors. Thorne emerged as an inspiring teacher, his past failures lending credibility to his message about ethical leadership. Cressida, still in prison, eventually requested a video call. Her demeanor had changed, the hardness beginning to crack, though she remained guarded. I saw the article about Thorne's program, she said without preamble. Some of the inmates here. Their kids are applying. I waited, sensing there was more. Maybe I could contribute something. From here. I've been studying corporate law from the prison library, understanding how it can be used to protect people instead of exploit them. It was the first time she had offered anything without expecting something in return. I would welcome that. Cressida. The program needs legal guidance for these young entrepreneurs. Our rapprochement remained tentative, built on small gestures rather than grand reconciliations. She began writing legal primers for the foundation, explaining complex business concepts in accessible language. Her work was excellent, stripped of the pretension that had once characterized her professional persona. Perhaps prison had taught her the clarity that comes from having everything non-essential stripped away. The following year brought unexpected recognition. The foundation received an international award for corporate accountability, presented at a ceremony in Zurich. As I accepted the honor, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment, from a woman who discovered her children's betrayal to someone who had helped reshape how society viewed financial abuse and corporate responsibility. In my acceptance speech, I shared something I had never spoken about publicly. The morning I discovered my children had been stealing from me, I felt my world end. Everything I believed about love, trust, and family shattered in an instant. But, standing here today, I realized that shattering was necessary. It cleared the ground for something stronger to grow. I returned home to find my greenhouse thriving with new additions from around the world, gifts from people whose lives had been touched by our work. Among them was the extraordinary specimen, a hybrid orchid created by a botanical laboratory in Singapore named Redemption's Triumph in honor of the Foundation's mission. As I examined the unique bloom, Cordelia joined me, now Dr. Cordelia Thorne, having completed her doctorate with a groundbreaking thesis on orchid conservation. We're mapping the genome of endangered species, she explained excitedly. But more than that, we're documenting how traditional communities have preserved these plants through generations of careful stewardship. Sounds like the Foundation's work, I observed, preserving valuable assets while respecting their origins. She smiled. I learned from the best. You've taught me that conservation isn't just about protecting what exists. It's about creating conditions for new growth. That evening, Thorne arrived for our weekly dinner, accompanied by his partner Sarah, a former prosecutor who now worked with the Foundation's legal team. As we gathered around the table that had witnessed so much betrayal and reconciliation, I marveled at how different these family meals had become. The conversation flowed easily, touching on the Foundation's latest initiatives, Cordelia's research, Thorne's expanding youth program. Sarah shared stories from her work protecting elderly clients from financial exploitation. There was laughter, debate, and genuine warmth, elements that had been absent from family gatherings for so many years. After dinner, as the younger generation cleared the table, I stepped out to my greenhouse for a moment of solitude. The orchids glowed softly under the evening lights, each one a testament to patience and possibility. My phone chimed with a message from an unknown number. This is Victoria Zhao writing from prison. I have information about other families targeted by our conspiracy. Perhaps it's time to make amends. I stared at the message, weighing the sincerity against the source. Trust, once shattered, was not easily rebuilt. But if my journey had taught me anything, it was that redemption could bloom in the most unlikely places, given the right conditions and careful tending. I typed back, "I'm listening." The investigation that followed Victoria's cooperation uncovered a network of financial predators targeting wealthy families across Asia. Working with international law enforcement, we helped recover millions in stolen assets and prevented countless future crimes. Victoria's testimony proved crucial in securing convictions, though I never forgot that her cooperation came only after her empire had crumbled. 5 years after the original betrayal, Cressida was granted early parole based on her work with the Foundation and cooperation in ongoing investigations. Her release coincided with the 10th anniversary gala of the Dimitri Vance Foundation, held at Wildrose Manor. The guest list included beneficiaries, volunteers, law enforcement partners, and reformed offenders who now worked in financial crime prevention. As guests arrived, I stood in my greenhouse, gathering strength from my orchids. Cressida would attend, her first visit home since her arrest. The morning had brought a small package from her, a hand-carved wooden box containing detailed plans for a legal aid clinic serving elderly victims of financial abuse. The gala showcased the Foundation's evolution from a personal mission to an international movement. Video testimonials played throughout the evening, featuring people whose lives had been transformed by our work. Awards were presented to exceptional volunteers and partner organizations. Thorne delivered a keynote address about the intersection of business ethics and social responsibility. When Cressida entered, the room fell silent. She looked different, humbled, her designer clothes replaced by simple attire, her expression uncertain. I watched from across the room as Thorne approached her, the two siblings who had once plotted together, now standing on opposite sides of redemption's journey. Their conversation was brief but significant. Thorne extended his hand. Cressida took it. No dramatic reconciliation, just a small gesture acknowledging shared history and divergent paths. Later, she approached me in the greenhouse, where I had retreated for a moment of calm. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said, her voice stripped of its former arrogance. "I just want you to know that I finally understand what we destroyed. Not just Dad's life or your trust, but the very foundation of what makes us human. I studied my daughter, searching for the child I had once known beneath the layers of ambition and greed. Understanding is the first step, Cressida. What matters now is what you build with that understanding." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "I want to help, really help. Not for redemption or reputation, but because it's right." Over the following months, Cressida established her legal aid clinic, working pro bono for elderly victims of financial abuse. Her insider knowledge of how predators operated proved invaluable in developing prevention strategies. She lived modestly, donating most of her earnings to the foundation, slowly rebuilding trust through consistent action rather than grand gestures. The manor became a center for healing and education. We hosted workshops on financial literacy, support groups for betrayal survivors, and training sessions for law enforcement. The greenhouse served as a meditation space where visitors could find peace among the orchids while processing their own traumas. On Dimitri's birthday, the family gathered at his grave: Thorne, Cressida, Cordelia, and myself. We didn't speak much, just stood together acknowledging the man whose death had triggered such devastating revelations and unexpected transformations. Afterward, in my greenhouse, Cordelia presented me with her latest research project, a book documenting the parallel evolution of orchid cultivation and human resilience. Roots of Redemption, she called it, dedicated to those who choose to bloom after the harshest winters. As she explained her thesis about adaptive strategies in both plants and people, I realized our family had become its own case study in resilience. We had adapted to betrayal, found symbiotic relationships in unexpected places, and developed new strategies for thriving in hostile conditions. The Foundation's work continued to expand, reaching into corporate boardrooms and community centers alike. We developed AI tools to detect financial elder abuse patterns, created international databases of known predators, and established scholarship programs for students pursuing careers in financial crime prevention. One autumn morning, as I was preparing for a Foundation board meeting, I received a call from Detective Morrison, now Chief Morrison. He had one final piece of information about Dimitri's death, a confession letter from a Zhao family associate confirming that the murder had been planned for years, with my children recruited only in the final stages. "Does this change how you feel about Thorne and Cressida?" he asked. I considered the question while gazing at my orchids. They were still responsible for their choices, Chief, but knowing they were targeted and groomed by master manipulators adds context. Evil rarely appears wearing its true face. That afternoon, I shared the information with my children. Neither sought to use it as an excuse, but I saw something shift in their understanding of their own culpability. They had been predators, yes, but also prey to even more sophisticated hunters. The revelation sparked a new Foundation initiative focused on identifying and interrupting grooming patterns in financial crimes. We partnered with psychology departments to study how trusted individuals could be corrupted over time, developing intervention strategies to break these cycles before they resulted in tragedy. As my 70th birthday approached, the Foundation organized a global symposium on financial justice and family reconciliation. Experts from around the world gathered to share research and strategies. The highlight was a panel featuring reformed offenders, including Thorne and Cressida, discussing the psychology of betrayal and the path to redemption. The symposium's closing ceremony was held in my greenhouse, where attendees could wander among thousands of orchids while reflecting on the conference themes. The space had been expanded over the years, now including rare specimens from every continent and several hybrids developed through Cordelia's research program. Standing before the assembled group, I shared my final thoughts. When I began this journey, I thought I was fighting against something, against greed, against betrayal, against the darkness in human nature. But I've learned that the real work is fighting for something, for trust, for justice, for the possibility of transformation. That night, after the guests had departed, my family gathered in the Manor's library. 3 generations united not by blood alone, but by shared purpose and hard-earned wisdom. We reviewed plans for the Foundation's next decade, discussed Cordelia's latest research proposals, and celebrated small victories in ongoing cases. As the evening wound down, Thorne raised a glass. "To the woman who taught us that strength isn't about avoiding betrayal, but about choosing how to respond when it comes. To Mom." Cressida added quietly, "And to Dad, whose death revealed truths that ultimately saved us from ourselves." We drank in silence, acknowledging the complex legacy of love, loss, and redemption that had shaped our unconventional family. Outside, moonlight filtered through the greenhouse glass, illuminating the orchids that had witnessed our destruction and rebuilding. Later, alone among my plants, I reflected on the journey from that first shocking discovery to this moment of quiet triumph. The orchids around me represented more than just horticultural success. They embodied the principle that had guided me through the darkest times, that with proper care, patience, and the right conditions, even the most damaged roots could produce extraordinary blooms. My phone buzzed with a message from a foundation volunteer in Australia. "Thanks to your protocols, we just prevented a $1 million theft targeting an elderly widow. The perpetrator, her own grandson, family safe, assets secured, young man in counseling instead of prison." I smiled, knowing that somewhere in Australia, another family had been spared our painful journey while still having the opportunity for redemption. This was the true legacy of our ordeal. Not just justice served, but cycles of abuse interrupted and transformed. As I prepared for bed, I found myself thinking about a conversation I'd had years earlier with my own mother. She had warned me about spoiling the children, about the dangers of giving too much without teaching gratitude. I hadn't listened then, too caught up in my desire to provide everything I'd never had. Now I understood that true inheritance wasn't about money or property. It was about values, resilience, and the wisdom to know that love sometimes requires the hardest choices. My children had learned this lesson through loss and consequence. Future generations, through our foundation's work, might learn it through education and example. The next morning brought news that would have devastated me years earlier, but now filled me with quiet pride. Cressida had been offered a prestigious position with an international law firm specializing in corporate ethics. The hiring committee had been impressed not just by her legal expertise, but by her profound understanding of how good people could make terrible choices. During our weekly video call, she shared her decision to accept the position, but donate half her salary to establishing foundation chapters in developing countries. "It's not about the money anymore, Mom. It's about preventing other families from experiencing what we did." That afternoon, I walked through my greenhouse with Cordelia, now pregnant with her first child. We discussed names, nursery designs, and the values she hoped to instill in the next generation. As she spoke about teaching her child the difference between privilege and entitlement, I felt the cycle of healing complete itself. "Sometimes I wonder if things could have been different," she mused, hand resting on her growing belly. "If you hadn't discovered their plan, would they have gone through with it?" I paused beside a dendrobium I had named Second Chances, its purple blooms vibrant against glossy leaves. "The capacity for both good and evil exists in everyone, dear. What matters is which one we feed. Your father and aunt fed their greed until it consumed them. Now they're learning to nourish something better." That evening, as sunset painted the sky in shades of coral and gold, I hosted a dinner for local foundation volunteers. The conversation ranged from case studies to gardening tips, legal strategies to grandparenting advice. Thorne arrived late, still wearing his ID badge from the youth center where he now served as director. "Sorry I'm late," he apologized, kissing my cheek. "We had a breakthrough with one of our most challenging students today. Turns out his father had been pressuring him to help scam his grandmother out of her pension. The kid came to us for help, instead." I felt a surge of pride as he shared how they'd intervened, protecting both the grandmother and the teenager from a cycle of exploitation. This was the true measure of our success, not just the millions recovered or the criminals prosecuted, but the future betrayals prevented, the families kept whole. After the volunteers left, Thorne and I sat in the conservatory, discussing an invitation he'd received to speak at an international conference on restorative justice. "It still feels strange sometimes," he admitted. "Using my worst mistakes to help others avoid the same path." "That's exactly why your voice matters," I assured him. "Theory is important, but lived experience carries a weight that can't be replicated. Your story proves that redemption is possible without minimizing the harm caused." The next week brought a surprise visitor. A young woman appeared at my door, clutching a folder of legal documents and fighting back tears. Her name was Elena, and she had discovered her husband and brother-in-law plotting to have her declared mentally incompetent to seize her inheritance. "I found your foundation online," she explained, sitting in my kitchen as I poured tea. "The situation felt so familiar to your story. I didn't know where else to turn. I connected her with our legal team, who quickly obtained restraining orders and began documenting the conspiracy. Within days, we had uncovered evidence of forged medical documents and fraudulent power of attorney papers. The case was depressingly familiar, yet each instance still struck me as a fresh betrayal of human decency. As our team worked to protect Elena's assets and build a criminal case against her relatives, I found myself reflecting on how many people suffered in silence, unaware that help existed. Despite our foundation's growth, we were still only reaching a fraction of those in need. This realization led to our most ambitious project yet, a global awareness campaign called Trust But Verify. Working with governments, nonprofits, and media organizations, we launched educational initiatives in 20 languages, teaching people how to protect themselves while maintaining healthy family relationships. The campaign's launch coincided with the 15th anniversary of my children's arrest. Media outlets revisited our story, but now with a focus on transformation rather than scandal. Interviews featured Thorne discussing his work with at-risk youth, Cressida explaining corporate accountability legislation she'd helped draft, and Cordelia sharing research on intergenerational trauma and healing. During a televised interview, the host asked me what advice I would give my younger self, the woman who had just discovered her children's betrayal. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by courier to Wildrose Manor. The envelope bore the official seal of the Singapore Ministry of Justice, its weight suggesting multiple pages of legal documentation. As I signed for the package, my mind raced with possibilities, none of them particularly welcome. My experience with official documents had taught me that they rarely brought good news. In my study, surrounded by framed photographs of foundation, milestones, and botanical awards, I carefully opened the envelope. The first page made my hands tremble. Estate of Victoria Zhao. Posthumous confession and restitution. Victoria had died in prison 3 weeks earlier, a fact that had made international headlines given her family's notorious fall from grace. What I hadn't expected was that her final act would be reaching out to me. The confession ran to 20 pages, meticulously detailing every aspect of the conspiracy that had claimed my husband's life and nearly destroyed my family. But it was the final section that left me breathless. Victoria had left her entire remaining estate, some $30 million hidden in various international accounts, to the Dimitri Vance Foundation, with specific instructions that it be used to help families affected by corporate fraud and exploitation. I set the documents aside and walked to my greenhouse, seeking solace among my orchids. The Vanda coerulea I'd been nurturing for months had finally bloomed, its rare blue petals a reminder that beauty could emerge from the most challenging conditions. As I studied its delicate form, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Harrison Blackthorne, my attorney who had guided us through the darkest days of the criminal proceedings. "I assume you've received the package from Singapore," he said, without preamble. "We need to discuss the implications. This could reopen several closed cases." Within hours, my study had transformed into a war room. Harrison arrived with 3 associates, Nora Blackwood brought forensic accountants, and Detective Morrison, now retired but still consulting on financial crimes, joined via video call. The confession named names, exposed previously unknown shell corporations, and revealed a network of corruption that extended into several governments. "This is bigger than we imagined," Morrison said, his face grave on the screen. "Victoria's confession implicates at least a dozen other prominent families in similar schemes. We're looking at an international conspiracy targeting wealthy, elderly individuals." The ethical implications were staggering. Victoria's money was tainted, earned through murder and exploitation. Yet her detailed confession could help bring justice to countless victims and prevent future crimes. As we debated how to proceed, Cordelia arrived with her characteristic timing, her presence immediately shifting the room's energy. "You're considering whether to accept blood money," she observed, setting down her research materials. "But isn't the real question what we can transform it into?" Her words echoed something I'd told her years ago about our family's redemption. Money itself was neutral. Its moral weight came from how it was earned and how it was used. Victoria's confession offered us the tools to dismantle an entire network of predators. The funds she left could support that mission. Over the next several weeks, I worked with our legal team to carefully document every revelation in Victoria's confession. We created detailed flowcharts tracking the movement of money through offshore accounts, identified patterns in how targets were selected and groomed, and compiled evidence that could be used in multiple jurisdictions. The media attention was instant and intense. Reporters camped outside the manor, their satellite trucks lining our quiet street. I gave one press conference, carefully scripted to focus on the victims rather than the sensational details of the conspiracy. Victoria Zhao's confession reveals a systematic assault on family trust, I told the assembled journalists. While we cannot undo the harm caused, we can ensure that these revelations lead to meaningful change in how financial crimes are investigated and prosecuted. The international response was swift. Law enforcement agencies from 15 countries formed a joint task force codenamed Operation Bloodline, dedicated to investigating the networks exposed in Victoria's confession. Our foundation provided expert consultation, drawing on our years of experience with similar cases. During this period, I received an unexpected visitor. Maylene Zhao, Victoria's daughter, appeared at my door one rainy afternoon. She was nothing like her mother, soft-spoken, dressed simply, her eyes carrying a weight of shame that seemed to age her beyond her 30 years. "I need you to know that I knew nothing," she said, declining my offer of tea. "But ignorance doesn't absolve me. I benefited from my family's crimes even if I didn't participate in them." We talked for hours in my greenhouse, surrounded by orchids that seemed to listen to our conversation. Maylene was a pediatrician who had distanced herself from the family business years ago, sensing something corrupt at its core but never imagining the full scope of their crimes. She had spent the weeks since her mother's death grappling with her inheritance of shame. "I want to help," she said finally. "Not just with money, but with my time, my skills. There must be some way I can make amends." Her sincerity reminded me of Thorne's early attempts at redemption. I suggested she start by volunteering at our foundation's free clinics, where elderly victims of financial abuse often needed basic medical care they could no longer afford. The symbolism wasn't lost on either of us, a Zhao helping to heal the wounds her family had inflicted. The foundation's work expanded dramatically with the infusion of Victoria's funds. We established satellite offices in Singapore, Hong Kong, and London, following the trail of the conspiracy. Each new location allowed us to reach more victims and train more professionals in recognizing the signs of elder financial abuse. One particularly challenging case involved a prominent family in Switzerland, where banking secrecy laws had long protected financial criminals. Victoria's confession included detailed information about accounts used to hide stolen assets, but accessing them required navigating a complex web of international regulations. I flew to Zurich with our legal team, prepared for a protracted battle. To my surprise, we were met by a delegation of Swiss banking officials who had been following our foundation's work. The recent scandals had damaged Switzerland's reputation as a financial haven, and they were eager to demonstrate their commitment to transparency and justice. "Your foundation has shown that it's possible to fight financial crime without destroying the legitimate privacy rights of honest citizens," the lead official explained. "We want to work with you to establish new protocols that protect the vulnerable while respecting banking traditions." This collaboration led to the Zurich Protocols, a set of international banking standards that balanced privacy with protection against elder financial abuse. Banks that adopted these protocols agreed to enhanced monitoring of accounts belonging to elderly clients, automatic alerts for suspicious activity patterns, and cooperation with certified foundation investigators. Back home, the impact of Victoria's confession continued to ripple through the legal system. Several high-profile families faced criminal charges, their carefully constructed facades crumbling under scrutiny. Each case followed a similar pattern: trusted relatives or associates who had systematically isolated their elderly victims while draining their assets. One evening, while reviewing case files in my study, I received a video call from Thorne. He was at a youth center in Detroit, where he had been invited to speak about ethical business practices. Behind him, I could see teenagers gathered around computers, working on their entrepreneurship projects. "Mom, you won't believe what happened today," he said, his excitement palpable. "One of our students just secured her first investor meeting. She's 16, from a family with a history of financial crime, and she's creating an app to help elderly people monitor their accounts for suspicious activity." The symmetry was perfect. A child from a family of predators developing tools to protect potential victims. This was the kind of transformation I had hoped for when I first established the foundation, though I never imagined it would take such a personal turn. That weekend, Cordelia's research team published a groundbreaking paper on the genetic factors that influence ethical decision-making. While careful to avoid deterministic conclusions, their work suggested that both nature and nurture played roles in shaping moral character. "It's like your orchids," Cordelia explained during our regular greenhouse sessions. "Genetics provide the potential, but environment determines which traits flourish. Our family had the genetic capacity for both good and evil. The environment we created after the crisis nurtured the better traits." Her research had practical applications for our foundation's work. By understanding the factors that influenced ethical development, we could better design intervention programs for at-risk youth. Several juvenile justice systems began incorporating our approaches, focusing on rehabilitation rather than punishment for young people involved in financial crimes. The anniversary of Dimitri's death arrived with unexpected ceremony. The Singapore government, in recognition of our work exposing the conspiracy behind his murder, posthumously awarded him their highest civilian honor for ethical business leadership. The ceremony was held at the same hotel where he had died, now transformed into a symbol of justice rather than tragedy. Thorne and Cressida stood beside me as I accepted the award on their father's behalf. Both had insisted on attending, despite the painful memories associated with the location. In my acceptance speech, I spoke about the long arc of justice and the possibility of redemption. "My husband died believing in the fundamental goodness of people," I said, looking out at an audience that included reformed criminals, victims' advocates, and international law enforcement officials. "Even those who betrayed him most deeply have proven him right by choosing to transform their guilt into service." After the ceremony, we visited Dimitri's grave, now marked with a new headstone that included his posthumous honor. Cressida knelt beside it, placing a small orchid, grown from seeds in my greenhouse, on the polished granite. "I'm sorry, Dad," she whispered, her voice carrying years of hard-won humility. "I'm trying to be the daughter you deserved." The following month brought another unexpected development. A Hollywood producer contacted me about adapting our story for a limited series. At first, I was reluctant. Our family's journey felt too personal for entertainment. But Cordelia convinced me to consider it. "Think about all the families who could recognize warning signs through our story," she argued. "Drama reaches people in ways that documentaries and articles can't." We negotiated carefully, insisting on accuracy and respect for all involved, including the perpetrators who had shown genuine remorse. The production company agreed to donate a percentage of profits to the foundation and to consult with us on every script. During the filming, I spent time on set, watching actors recreate the most painful moments of my life. It was surreal seeing someone else deliver the words I had spoken when I discovered my children's betrayal. But the young actress playing Cordelia captured something essential, the hope that had sustained us through the darkest times. The series premiered to critical acclaim and sparked a global conversation about family, trust, and redemption. Viewership was highest in countries where elder financial abuse was rarely discussed openly. We received thousands of emails from people who recognized their own situations in our story and reached out for help. One particularly moving message came from a woman in Japan whose son had been pressuring her to sign over her property. After Watching the series, she contacted our Tokyo office and received the support she needed to protect her assets while getting her son into counseling. They were now working to rebuild their relationship with the help of our family mediation program. The success of the series led to increased funding for the foundation. We established the Victoria Zhao Memorial Fund, using her estate to create a specialized unit focused on international financial crime. The irony of naming it after one of our chief antagonists wasn't lost on anyone, but it felt appropriate. Even in death, Victoria was helping to undo the damage she had caused in life. At a board meeting to discuss the foundation's expansion, Thorne presented a proposal that surprised everyone. He wanted to establish a program specifically for the children of financial criminals, providing them with counseling, education, and mentorship to break the cycle of criminal behavior. These kids didn't choose their parents, he argued passionately, but they're often treated as guilty by association. They need support to chart a different path. The board approved the program unanimously. Within 6 months, we were working with dozens of young people whose parents were either incarcerated or under investigation for financial crimes. Many were struggling with shame, anger, and confusion about their identity. Our program provided a safe space for them to process these emotions while learning about ethical decision-making. One evening, while working late in my greenhouse, I received an unexpected call from a number I didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was elderly and hesitant. "Mrs. Vance, this is Dr. Whitmore. I owe you an apology." Dr. Whitmore, the psychiatrist who had agreed to testify about my supposed mental decline as part of my children's scheme. I had wondered what had become of him after the conspiracy unraveled. "I've been following your foundation's work," he continued. "I violated everything I believed in as a physician. I let greed override my oath to do no harm. I want to make amends, if you'll let me." We met for coffee the following week. The man who sat across from me was a shadow of the confident professional who had once been prepared to destroy my life for a fee. His medical license had been revoked, his reputation destroyed. He lived on a modest pension, haunted by the role he had played in the conspiracy. "I've been volunteering at a free clinic," he said, his hands shaking slightly as he lifted his cup. "Many of the patients are elderly people dealing with trauma from financial abuse. I want to do more." I studied him carefully, looking for signs of manipulation but finding only genuine remorse. "We could use someone with your expertise in our victim support programs," I said finally. "But you'll need to be completely transparent about your past." He nodded eagerly. "I want people to know what I did. Maybe my story can help prevent other professionals from making the same mistakes." Dr. Whitmore joined our team as a volunteer counselor, working with elderly victims of financial abuse. His understanding of how medical professionals could be corrupted made him particularly effective at identifying cases where doctors had been co-opted into schemes against their patients. Several cases were resolved thanks to his insights. The Foundation's 10th anniversary celebration was held at the United Nations headquarters in New York. We had been invited to present our model for combating elder financial abuse to the General Assembly. As I stood at the podium where World leaders had addressed global crises, I reflected on how far we had come from that morning when I discovered my children's betrayal. Financial abuse of the elderly is not just a crime against individuals, I told the assembled delegates. It's an assault on the wisdom and dignity of our elders, the very foundation upon which civilized societies are built. When we allow the vulnerable to be exploited, we corrode the bonds of trust that hold communities together. After my speech, I was approached by delegates from several developing nations, where elder abuse was endemic but rarely addressed. They wanted to establish foundation chapters in their countries, adapting our model to local cultures and legal systems. Within a year, we had expanded to 6 new countries, each bringing unique challenges and insights to our work. In India, we discovered patterns of daughters-in-law systematically abusing their husbands' parents. exploiting traditional family hierarchies. Our Delhi office developed specialized programs that respected cultural norms while protecting elderly rights. In Brazil, we uncovered schemes targeting retirees through false religious organizations. Our São Paulo team worked with legitimate faith leaders to educate congregations about financial exploitation. Back home, the Foundation's success had transformed Ravenscroft Harbor into a center for financial crime research and prevention. The old courthouse had been converted into our international headquarters, its courtrooms now serving as training facilities for law enforcement and financial professionals from around the world. One morning, while teaching a class on detecting early warning signs of elder abuse, I noticed a familiar face in the back row. Marina Santos, the prosecutor who had secured convictions against my children, had retired from government service to join our faculty full-time. "I spent my career putting criminals in prison," she explained during a break. "Now I want to prevent crimes before they happen. Your foundation showed me that's possible." The Foundation's educational programs expanded beyond professional training. We developed curricula for schools, teaching children about financial literacy and ethical decision-making. Thorne led this initiative, drawing on his experience with at-risk youth to create engaging, age-appropriate materials. During a pilot program at a local elementary school, I watched him teach a group of fifth graders about the difference between wants and needs, using examples from his own journey from greed to service. The children were captivated, asking questions that revealed a natural understanding of fairness and justice that many adults had lost along the way. "Kids get it," Thorne told me afterward. "They understand that taking something that isn't yours is wrong, even if you really want it. It's only as we get older that we start making excuses for our greed." That evening, I received a call from Cressida, who was in Geneva presenting a paper on international financial crime legislation. Her work had gained recognition in legal circles, though she always credited her insights to her unique perspective as a reformed perpetrator. "Mom, you'll never guess who I ran into at the conference," she said, excitement in her voice. "Mei Lin Zhao. She's doing incredible work with medical professionals, teaching them to recognize signs of elder abuse in their patients." The interconnections continued to multiply. Children of victims found healing through our programs. Reformed criminals dedicated their lives to prevention. Professionals who had enabled abuse worked to expose and stop it. Each person touched by our work became part of an expanding network of protection and redemption. On my 75th birthday, my family surprised me with a celebration in the greenhouse. 3 generations gathered among the orchids, including Cordelia's young twins who had inherited their mother's love of botany. As I watched them carefully water the seedlings they had planted, I felt the continuity of our mission. "Grandma Tess," asked the older twin, a serious girl named Flora, "why do orchids take so long to grow?" I knelt beside her, touching the eye, tender green shoots. "Because the most beautiful things in life can't be rushed, darling. They need time, patience, and lots of love, just like people who are learning to be better." That night, after everyone had gone home, I walked through my greenhouse one more time. The orchids glowed softly under the moonlight, each one a testament to resilience and transformation. On my desk sat a framed photo from our first Foundation gala, showing Thorne and Cressida in their prison uniforms, participating via video link. Beside it was a recent picture of them addressing the UN together, respected voices in the fight against financial crime. The journey from betrayal to redemption had been longer and more complex than I could have imagined. But as I looked at my flourishing orchids and thought of all the lives touched by our work, I knew that sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as our deepest wounds. My children had once tried to destroy me for money. In response, I had built something money couldn't buy, a legacy of justice, compassion, and the unwavering belief that people could change. As I prepared for bed, my phone chimed with a message from a Foundation volunteer in Australia. just prevented another elder abuse case. Family reconciled, assets protected. Your protocols work like magic." I smiled, knowing it wasn't magic. At all. It was the result of pain transformed into purpose, betrayal alchemized into wisdom, and the simple truth that love, real love, sometimes means holding people accountable while never giving up on their capacity for redemption. Tomorrow would bring new cases, new challenges, new opportunities to protect the vulnerable and guide the lost toward better choices. But tonight, I slept peacefully, surrounded by the quiet breathing of my orchids, knowing that even the darkest betrayal could bloom into something beautiful if tended with patience, wisdom, and unfailing hope. On the morning of my 80th birthday, I awoke to find frost etching delicate patterns across my greenhouse windows. The orchids seemed to glow in the winter light, their blooms defying the cold, much as I had defied expectations throughout my life. My bones ached with age now, but my mind remained as sharp as ever, a fact that still seemed to surprise those who encountered me in professional settings. I had planned to spend the day quietly reviewing foundation reports, but Cordelia had other ideas. She arrived at 9, bundled against the January chill, her twins trailing behind her with barely contained excitement. "Grandmother," she announced, handing me a thick envelope sealed with wax. "The board insisted that you take today off. This is non-negotiable." Inside the envelope was an itinerary for what they called the Legacy Tour, a day-long journey through the various institutions that had grown from our work. The twins bounced on their toes, clearly in on the surprise. "We're your tour guides," Flora declared proudly. Her brother Aidan nodded, adding, "Mom says we know almost as much about the foundation as you do." I changed into a comfortable suit and allowed myself to be escorted to the waiting car. Our first stop was the original foundation building, where staff had gathered in the lobby beneath a banner reading, "20 Years of Transformation." Faces new and familiar beamed as I entered, their applause washing over me like a warm wave. The young receptionist, whose grandmother had been one of our earliest cases, presented me with a leather-bound book. "Letters from those you've helped," she explained. "We've been collecting them for months." As we continued to the expanded headquarters downtown, I leafed through the book, reading messages from around the world. Each story represented a family, saved from the devastation I had experienced, elderly parents protected, predatory relatives held accountable, reconciliations achieved through justice rather than denial. The educational center occupied what had once been Ravenscroft Harbor's largest bank, a fitting transformation that never failed to amuse me. Here, thousands of professionals received training each year in detecting and preventing elder financial abuse. The wall of the main lecture hall displayed a quotation from my UN address. "Trust is a privilege to be earned, not a right to be exploited." Director Jensen, a former detective who had worked on similar cases, guided us through classrooms where simulations helped trainees recognize warning signs. "We've cut reported cases by 60% in regions where our graduates work," he noted proudly. "That's thousands of families spared what yours endured." Lunch brought us to the rehabilitation center, where those convicted of financial crimes against the elderly could undertake a rigorous program of therapy, education, and restorative justice. The facility operated on principles developed through our experience with Thorne and Cressida, emphasizing accountability without abandoning the possibility of redemption. The dining hall fell silent as I entered, then erupted in applause. These men and women, some still bearing the haunted look of those confronting their darkest actions, had been writing to me for years, sharing their journeys toward understanding the harm they had caused. Seeing them in person, engaged in the difficult work of becoming better than their worst choices, moved me deeply. A middle-aged woman approached, her hands trembling slightly. "Mrs. Vance, I'm Eliza Harmon. I stole from my grandfather. Your program saved my life." She gestured to an elderly gentleman seated nearby. "And gave me back my family. Grandpa is here today to support my graduation next week." I embraced them both, recognizing in their reconciliation the healing that had eluded Cressida for so long. Some wounds were too deep, some betrayals too fundamental to fully mend. Yet others, with proper care and genuine remorse, could become scars that strengthened rather than weakened the tissue of family bonds. The afternoon brought visits to the research institute that Cordelia had established, the legal clinic that bore Dimitri's name, and the youth entrepreneurship center where Thorne taught ethical business practices to teenagers from disadvantaged backgrounds. Each location represented a branch growing from the bitter seed of our family tragedy. As evening approached, the twins directed our driver to the harbor, where a small crowd had gathered on the boardwalk. A canvas-covered structure stood at the center, clearly awaiting unveiling. "The final stop on your legacy tour," Aiden announced grandly. The mayor stepped forward, offering me her arm as we approached the mysterious installation. "Mrs. Vance, when the city council voted on how to recognize your 80th birthday, we wanted something that captured both your personal journey and your global impact." She nodded to Cordelia, who pulled a cord to reveal a stunning bronze sculpture. An elderly woman tending to an orchid, the plant's roots visibly extending downward to form the foundation of a protective structure sheltering multiple generations of a family. "Roots of redemption," the mayor announced. "A permanent reminder that from personal tragedy can grow universal protection." I traced my fingers over the bronze petals, moved beyond words by this public acknowledgement. The sculptor had captured something essential: how cultivation of beauty and justice required the same qualities: patience, vigilance, and unwavering commitment through seasons of dormancy and bloom. The evening ended with a surprise dinner at Wildrose Manor. As the car approached, I noticed unusual lighting in the greenhouse. Cordelia smiled mysteriously as she led me through the garden path. When the greenhouse doors opened, I gasped. The space had been transformed into a magnificent dining hall, with tables arranged between the orchid displays. Crystal chandeliers hung among the tropical foliage, casting rainbow prisms across the gathered faces. Thorne approached first, embracing me with the careful tenderness he had developed during his redemption journey. Behind him stood his wife Sarah and their adopted daughter Lucia, a former client's granddaughter who had lost her family to the yaw. Same kind of betrayal that had shattered ours. "Happy birthday, Mom," he said, his voice steady with the earned confidence of a man who had rebuilt himself from the foundation up. The guest list reflected the complicated tapestry of our story. Former prosecutors who had secured my children's convictions now sat beside reformed offenders who taught in our programs. Detective Morrison, long retired but still involved with the foundation, chatted with Mei Lin Zhao, whose medical programs had saved countless vulnerable seniors. Even Dr. Whitmore was present, his decade of volunteer service having gradually earned him a place in our circle of redemption. He had never sought forgiveness, only the opportunity to balance his moral ledger through consistent service, an approach I had come to respect. The only absence that registered deeply was Cressida's. Though she had built a respected career helping draft international financial protection legislation, our relationship remained formal, bounded by the memory of betrayal too profound to fully transcend. She sent flowers each year on my birthday, and contributed regularly to the Foundation's Legal Resource Center, but maintained the distance she seemed to need. As dinner wound down, Cordelia signaled for attention. "We have one more surprise," she announced, nodding toward the greenhouse entrance. The doors opened to reveal a familiar figure I hadn't seen in person for nearly 5 years. Cressida stood, hesitantly in the doorway, elegant in a simple navy dress, holding a small potted orchid. The room fell silent as she approached the head table. "Mother," she said, her voice carrying the careful control of someone navigating emotionally treacherous terrain. "I wasn't sure if I should come, but I didn't want to miss this milestone." She set the plant before me, a Paphiopedilum fairyanum, one of the rarest orchids in the world, thought extinct until rediscovered in remote Himalayan valleys. The lost orchid, she explained softly. It disappeared for decades, then returned when no one expected it. The symbolism wasn't subtle, but it was sincere. I studied my daughter's face, noting the lines etched by years of carrying the weight of her choices. Her expression held neither expectation nor demand, just an offering of presence on this significant day. "Thank you for coming," I said simply, gesturing to the empty chair beside Thorne. "Would you like to join us?" The evening proceeded with cautious warmth. Cressida spoke mainly with Cordelia about the twins' academic interests, occasionally exchanging measured pleasantries with her brother. It wasn't the tearful reconciliation of television dramas, but something more authentic. Two people acknowledging a shared history, too complex for simple resolution, but perhaps not beyond evolving understanding. After the guests departed, I found myself alone in the greenhouse with both my children for the first time in years. The silence between us felt charged with unspoken words, decades of separate journeys converging in this sanctuary of growth and second chances. "Your work has changed the world," Cressida said finally, breaking the quiet. "All of this from something that should have destroyed you." "Us," Thorne corrected gently. "Something that should have destroyed us." I moved between them, touching, each lightly on the shoulder. "The foundation isn't just mine. It belongs to everyone who contributed to its mission, including both of you, in your different ways." Cressida's eyes glistened. "I've spent 20 years trying to balance the scales, knowing they can never truly balance." "Perhaps balance isn't the point," I suggested, gesturing to the orchids surrounding us. "Look at these plants. Asymmetrical, imperfect, yet whole in their uniqueness. Maybe that's what redemption really looks like." We walked together through the greenhouse, pausing beside the dendrobium that had once hidden the recording device revealing their betrayal. It had grown massive over the decades, its blooms cascading in purple profusion. "I never understood why you kept this one," Thorne remarked. "To remember that truth, however painful, allows for authentic growth," I explained. "That sometimes, what appears to destroy us actually reveals what needs to be rebuilt." Before leaving, Cressida hesitated at the door. "I'd like to come to the Foundation's international conference next month, as a speaker, if you'll have me. I've developed a program for law schools on the ethics of elder representation." "I think that would be valuable," I replied, careful not to overstate what this cautious reconnection might mean. After they departed, I returned to my favorite chair in the greenhouse, surrounded by the living testimony of patience rewarded. The journey from betrayal to purpose had not followed a straight line. There had been setbacks, disappointments, moments when forgiveness seemed impossible and justice inadequate. Yet somehow, the broken pieces had reformed into something stronger than what had been shattered. As I prepared for bed that night, I found an envelope that had been slipped under my door, Cressida's handwriting on the front. Inside was not another apology or explanation, but something far more meaningful. Legal documents establishing a scholarship fund for children of incarcerated parents, named for Dimitri. The note attached read simply, "Some debts can never be repaid, but perhaps they can be transformed. Thank you for showing me how." I slept peacefully that night, my dreams filled not with the betrayal that had once defined our family, but with the unexpected growth that had followed. Like my most challenging orchids, we had endured dormancy, trauma, and near death before finding our unique way to bloom again. In the morning, I awoke to find frost patterns on my bedroom windows that resembled delicate orchid petals. Nature's reminder that beauty can emerge from the coldest circumstances if given time, care, and the unwavering belief in possibility. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.